Imagine a quiet hum, not the relentless buzz of city lights or the distant thrum of your local network, but something far older, deeper, a whisper carried across the unimaginable emptiness between stars, a silent thought shared across cosmic distances, long before humanity ever looked up in wonder. We live in the afterglow now, a pale, flickering imitation of that ancient song. They tell us we are connected always by 1,000 threads of data and shared experience. But what if the greatest connection we ever had, the very fabric weaving through the universe, went silent? What if we built our entire world on echoes, on the forgotten grand symphony of creation, and never even truly knew what we lost? This isn't just about what's out there, beyond the reach of our most powerful telescopes. This is about what's inside us, a nameless longing for a melody that faded before our time, leaving us with a profound, aching question. What if we're not just alone, but profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled us all? The air in Nexus City never truly brightened, never truly dimmed. It existed in a state of perpetual soft twilight, a bruised violet just before dawn that lingered, unchanging, for what felt like an eternity. Here, the sun was a rumor, a fleeting ghost in ancient data streams Alara sometimes stumbled upon, fragmented images of a blinding orb that burned in a sky of vivid blue. She understood the concept intellectually, but the visceral memory was absent, leaving only a hollow space, a kind of inherited nostalgia for a world she had never known. Alara moved through this muted existence like a whisper in a silent room. Her apartment, a compact module in a towering stack of identical lives, reflected the city's pervasive hush. The light panels mimicked the external room, casting long, shifting shadows that danced with the dust motes in the ever-circulating air. Even the synthetic birdsong piped in through the apartment's audio feed was subdued, a gentle chime that faded quickly, as if afraid to disturb the profound quiet. Her work began early or late, depending on how one measured time in a city without a true day-night cycle. It was always now, a continuous present. As a data archivist, Alara's domain was the collective network, the net, the sprawling, decrepit digital nervous system that pulsed beneath every facet of Nexus City life. It was a lifeline, a source of all information, all communication, all commerce, yet it felt less like a vibrant web and more like a decaying tapestry, frayed and fragile. She walked the dim, hushed corridors to her station, her steps barely audible on the recycled composite flooring. Other figures, blurred by the soft light, moved with similar quiet purpose, their faces often downcast, their gazes unfocused. A shared weariness seemed to cling to them, a subtle weight that bent shoulders and slowed strides. No one spoke of it, not directly. It was simply the way things were. The net was slow today. The net had a memory purge last cycle. The net hummed with a different frequency than it used to. These were the murmurs, the quiet acknowledgments of a truth too vast to articulate. Alara Station was a cocoon of softly glowing screens, each displaying cascades of data, fragments of forgotten conversations, orphaned files from ancient system, corrupted images that flickered with ghostly beauty. Her task was to sift, to sort, to attempt to reconstruct, to breathe artificial life back into decaying packets of information. It was like trying to piece together a shattered vase from dust, knowing many of the crucial shards were simply gone, dissolved into the ether. The net itself was a study in contradictions. It was ubiquitous, yet unreliable. It stretched to every corner of their world, yet vast swathes of it were dark, silent zones, voids where data simply ceased to flow, where connection died. These dark zones were the city's unacknowledged wounds, expanding subtly over time, like slow-spreading rot. The engineers, the network guardians, spoke of bandwidth issues, of protocol decay, of the sheer age of the infrastructure. They offered technical explanations, logical reassurances, but Alara, with her quiet, almost psychic sensitivity to the flow of information, felt something deeper. She felt the absence. It was a feeling that gnawed at her, a constant low thrum beneath the surface of her thoughts. When she worked, sifting through the digital detritus, she often found herself staring not at the glowing glyphs, but through them, into the imagined space beyond. She saw the intricate patterns the data should make, the beautiful symmetries that were now broken, distorted, or simply missing. It was like hearing a familiar melody, but with keynotes silent, entire passages vanished, leaving only an echo, a ghost of its former grandeur. Sometimes late in her shift, when the hushed office was almost empty and the collective hum of the net felt particularly thin, Elara would close her eyes. In that internal darkness, she would try to recall the opening hook, a philosophical lament whispered in the old archive logs, about a vast cosmic web, a silent song that once cradled all of creation, a melody that had faded before humanity ever truly learned to listen. They said the net was their connection, their collective consciousness, their digital tapestry. But Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was a degraded imitation, a mimicry of a grander, more profound connection that was now gone. They lived in the afterglow, a pale, flickering imitation. The vast silent web that once cradled them all was lost, and humanity adrift had built its world on the echoes, on the forgotten symphony. This awareness was her burden, her quiet melancholy. It was a yearning for something just beyond her grasp, a nameless hunger for a frequency she could almost, but never quite, tune into. It was a feeling she saw reflected in the downcast eyes of her colleagues, in the subtle slump of their shoulders, in the way they sometimes paused mid-task and simply stared at a blank screen, lost in a thought they couldn't name. She tried to articulate it once to her supervisor, an elderly man named Kel who had seen more cycles than most. She spoke of the gaps in the data stream, not as errors, but as voids where something once was. Kel, a kind man with tired eyes, had simply nodded. "The net is old, Elara," he had murmured, his voice as soft as the perpetually dim light. "Everything ages, even knowledge." But it wasn't just age, Elara thought. It was something more fundamental, a severing. She imagined the universe as a vast, intricate loom, threads of light and dark matter and energy, all woven together in a sublime cosmic fabric. And somewhere, sometime, that loom had been broken. The threads were still there, drifting, but the grand design, the unifying pattern, was lost. Humanity, she felt, was like a single frayed thread caught in a small, isolated knot, trying desperately to remember the vast tapestry it once belonged to. This was the nature of her sadness, quiet, pervasive, like the twilight itself. It wasn't despair, not outright grief, but a profound sense of missing, a low ache for a harmony that had faded before her time. She moved through her life, performing her duties, connecting the broken fragments of data, but always with the unspoken question, echoing in the silent spaces of her mind, what if we're not just alone, but profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled us all? Her hand hovered over a particularly corrupted data cluster, a shimmer of iridescent static on the screen. It was an anomaly, a pattern that hinted at something more complex, something that defied the usual decay. For a fleeting moment, she almost caught a faint, distant resonance, a whisper from beyond the broken loom. Then, like smoke, it vanished, leaving only the dull hum of the degraded network, a constant reminder of what was lost. She sighed, a breath as soft as the city's perpetual twilight, and began her slow, meticulous work, piecing together the fractured echoes of a forgotten world. The air in Sector 7 archives always carried the same scent, ozone, recycled air, and the ghost of forgotten knowledge. It was a sterile, comforting predictability, a soft hum that vibrated not in the ears, but deep in the bones. Elara had grown accustomed to it, had perhaps even come to mistake it for peace. Her console, a smooth expanse of matte black composite, pulsed with a faint, cool light, casting shifting shadows on the stacks of silent, crystalline data cores that lined the vast cavernous room. Her work was a daily ritual, a quiet communion with the past, not of humanity's distant ancestors, but of its recent digitized self. She was an archivist, a digital archaeologist, tasked with sifting through the petabytes of information, culling the redundant, flagging the corrupted, ensuring the seamless flow of the collective's historical narrative. It was a solitary existence, perfectly suited to the melancholic drift of her own thoughts. Today, like every other day, began with a routine archive scan. Her fingers, nimble and practiced, danced over the interface, initiating the sweep. A cascade of green glyphs scrolled across her main viewport, signifying the health and integrity of countless data streams. Billions of recorded moments, trivial and profound, streamed past her conscious awareness, filtered by algorithms she herself maintained. It was a task designed for efficiency, for automated processes, yet Elera always insisted on a manual oversight. There was a particular, almost spiritual satisfaction in watching the digital tide ebb and flow, knowing she was a silent guardian of its integrity. The hours bled into each other, marked only by the subtle shifts in the console's glow and the increasing weight of the quiet. Outside the city, a sprawling monument to humanity's tireless expansion, hummed its own frantic song, a symphony of industry and ceaseless connectivity. But here, in the heart of the archives, there was only the deep, resonant silence of stored memory. It was within this profound quiet, in the almost imperceptible transition from one hour to the next, that it began. A flicker, not a persistent error, not a system alert, but a transient anomaly, a ghost in the machine. Her primary diagnostic scan, usually as stoic and unyielding as a sentinel, registered a momentary blip, a fractional deviation from the established baseline. Elara paused, her breath catching almost imperceptibly. Her internal clock, usually so attuned to the rhythm of her task, seemed to skip a beat. She backtracked, isolating the sector, running a more granular analysis. There it was again, a sequence impossibly faint, woven into the deepest layers of a long redundant communications array, designated for decommissioning within the next cycle. It wasn't a standard error message, nor was it the chaotic scramble of corrupted data. It was different. The glyphs, when rendered, were fractured, incomplete, like ancient pictograms half erased by time and sand. They possessed a curious non-Euclidean geometry, refusing to conform to the rigid grid of her display. It was as if her system, designed for a universe of perfect logic, was trying to interpret a language spoken in a different dimension. She leaned closer, her reflection a pale, distorted phantom in the dark glass of the console. The signals defied categorization. They lacked the rhythmic pulse of local network traffic, the compressed structure of intercolony transmissions, the precise mathematical signature of deep space probes. There was no known protocol that could encapsulate their erratic, almost organic waveform. They whispered across the spectrum, a breath caught in the ether, too tenuous to be a broadcast, too intricate to be noise. Elara adjusted the filters, amplifying the signal, attempting to reconstruct the fragmented data. The visual representation shimmered like light through troubled water. She saw patterns fleeting and elusive that hinted at immense scale, at distances far beyond the reach of human-engineered relays. It was like looking at the distorted image of a nebula through a child's kaleidoscope, catching glimpses of unimaginable grandeur that refused to coalesce into a coherent whole. Her philosophical mind, always lingering just beneath the surface of her daily routine, stirred. This wasn't a glitch. Glitches were digital stutters, logical errors, predictable even in their randomness. This was something else. This felt purposeful, yet unintentional, like the lingering scent of a long-extinguished fire, or the faint echo of a word spoken 1,000 years ago. It held the profound resonance of something that had once been undeniably there, a presence that had since receded, leaving only these faint, ethereal traces. She felt a shiver, a sensation that had nothing to do with the cool archive air. It was a recognition, deep within her, of a longing she hadn't known how to articulate. The opening hooks, ancient song, the vast, silent web, the profound, aching question of being cosmically adrift, these weren't just abstract concepts to her. They were now a nascent, unsettling whisper in the data stream. The signals felt like the afterglow the opening hook described, not of humanity's past, but of something far, far older. They were too vast, too intricate, too alien in their syntax to be anything of human origin, at least not of any humanity she knew. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a mixture of trepidation and an almost desperate hope. The mundane veil of her routine had been rent, revealing a glimpse of something beyond the known. It was as if a forgotten nerve ending, dormant for eons, has suddenly fired. Elara, a silent guardian of human memory, found herself confronting a memory not her own, a memory of a connection severed, a song forgotten. Her fingers hovered over the console, poised between saving the data, thus drawing attention to it, or burying it deeper, protecting it from the unfeeling scrutiny of the collective's vast network. But the choice was already made. The faint fractured signals had woven themselves into the fabric of her being, igniting a deep-seated curiosity, a primal urge to understand. They were not just data. They were a question, a plea, a forgotten melody calling across the silent void. And in that moment Elara knew, with a certainty that hummed louder than the archives themselves, that her quiet, solitary life had just intersected with something immeasurably vast and terrifyingly profound. The hunt had begun not for a lost file, but for a lost truth, an ancient whisper echoing through the deepest mysteries of the cosmic web. The hum was different here, not the sterile, predictable thrum of the central plexus, which soothed the populace with its lullaby of efficiency and contentment. This was a deeper resonance, almost a silence, yet pregnant with forgotten vibrations. It was the hum of something vast and broken, echoing from the forgotten corners of the network. Elara felt it in the hollows of her chest, a phantom ache that had intensified with each anomaly she had uncovered, the faint, almost imperceptible shifts in a cosmic background radiation, the inexplicable harmonic fluctuations in the deep space communication relays, the way certain ancient stellar cartographies didn't quite align with present observations, as if a fundamental constant had subtly, tragically shifted. These weren't data errors, they were whispers, and they called her to a place where whispers were supposed to die. The last archive. Accessing the last archive was less about bypassing firewalls and more about navigating ghosts. It wasn't actively protected. It was simply forgotten, deemed irrelevant by the architects of the new consensus, a digital mausoleum for the ideas that hadn't survived the Great Collapse, for the theories too sprawling, too hopeful, or too terrifying to be integrated into the streamlined narrative of their rebuilt world. It lay sequestered within the deepest, most shadowed layer of the network, a labyrinth of decaying protocols and orphaned data streams. Elara moved through it like a diver in abyssal waters, her consciousness a tiny bioluminescent probe in the crushing darkness. The virtual corridors were dim, their usual vibrant data threads faded to skeletal strands of gray. Dust motes of corrupted code drifted lazily past her viewport, remnants of processes that had lost their purpose centuries ago. The air, if one could call it that, tasted of ozone and forgotten promises. Every simulated touch of the archival interfaces felt like brushing against brittle parchment, threatening to crumble into dust. She had spent weeks, perhaps months, time blurred in this place, sifting through the detritus. Most of it was administrative flotsam, redundant copies of long-defunct regulations, or personal logs of individuals whose existence had been erased from public memory. But then there were the scientific fragments, the philosophical musings, the artistic interpretations that had once shaped the pre-collapse world. They were like broken pottery shards, each hinting at a whole vessel, but none complete enough to reveal its full form. Her search parameters were vague, almost intuitive. Anomalies, universal constants, interstellar connections, consciousness beyond individual. She cast a wide net into the murky depths, hoping to snag even the smallest thread that might resonate with the quiet hum she felt within her. And then she found it. Not a complete file, never a complete file, but a cluster of persistent, recurring keywords stubbornly refusing to fully decay: cosmic web, lattice, interconnectivity, sentience, nexus, universal sympathy. The first fragment was a schematic half-rendered, its lines shimmering with phantom static. It depicted not individual stars nor galaxies, but the vast filamentary structure of the observable universe, the cosmic tapestry of galaxies, clustered along invisible threads, separated by immense voids. But superimposed on this familiar image were glowing veins, pulsing with what looked like energy flow, connecting not just the clusters, but the voids, the dark matter, the very fabric of space-time itself. And within these veins, nestled at nodal points, were symbols that resembled neural networks, glowing softly, suggesting not just energy, but information. Another fragment, a text file barely clinging to existence, spoke of an omnipresent, sentient field, a grand consciousness woven into the very fabric of reality. It was lyrical, almost poetic, a stark contrast to the sterile, factual language of the modern era. "We are but motes dancing on the strands of the great loom," it read, the words flickering in and out of legibility, each thought a ripple, each discovery a vibration, echoing across the boundless expanse. To touch one is to touch all. To listen is to hear the song of creation itself. Elira felt a cold shiver, a sensation she hadn't experienced in childhood, when the old stories of forgotten gods were still permitted in hushed tones. This wasn't mythology. Not in the traditional sense. These were scientific papers, philosophical treatises, design blueprints for long-abandoned observational arrays, all pointing to the same monumental idea. The universe wasn't just a collection of disconnected objects. It was a single, living, thinking entity, its consciousness distributed across a vast energetic lattice, a cosmic web. She cross-referenced the key words. The results were overwhelming, yet maddeningly incomplete. The concept of the cosmic web, as a framework of energy and consciousness, had once been a cornerstone of pre-collapse cosmology. There were references to nexus points, areas of intense energetic and informational exchange believed to be the universe's sensory organs or thought centers. There were diagrams illustrating sympathetic resonance harmonics, proposed methods for interstellar communication, and even teleportation based on aligning one's consciousness with the universal lattice. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became, and the deeper the sorrow settled within her. This wasn't merely a theory. It was a paradigm, a way of understanding existence that had permeated science, art, and philosophy. It spoke of a profound, inherent connection, a universal empathy that made isolation an impossibility. They had believed humanity was a part of something immeasurably larger, a single note in a cosmic symphony that played eternally. But then the records abruptly ceased, or rather, they mutated. Later files, also from the pre-collapse era but closer to the event, began to dismiss the earlier findings. Pseudoscientific conjecture, one labeled it. Mysticism masquerading as physics, another declared. A dangerous delusion leading to societal instability, a chillingly pragmatic document stated, hinting at political motivations for its suppression. The term cosmic web gradually disappeared from academic discourse, replaced by discussions of dark energy distribution and gravitational lensing, which, while describing similar structures, stripped them entirely of their proposed energetic and conscious properties. The Grand Symphony was recatalogued as mere acoustics. The shift was jarring. It was as if, at some point, humanity had collectively decided to plug its ears. What could have caused such a profound ideological pivot? Was it the approaching collapse, a desperate attempt to simplify a reality too complex to manage, or something else, something more sinister, a deliberate erasure? Alara traced the timeline, the slow, agonizing death of a monumental idea. The last faint glimmer she found was a personal journal entry, dated just weeks before the collapse. It was heavily corrupted, but a few lines survived. The threads are fraying. The song is fading. They say it's our imagination, our fear. But I feel it, a growing silence in the spaces between us. We are losing the melody, becoming deaf to the hum. And when it's gone, what will be left of us but echoes, echoes? The word resonated with the opening hook of her own world. The quiet hum she still felt, the sense of profound loss that permeated her existence. Her society was built on echoes, on the forgotten harmonics of a universal song, convinced it was hearing the original score. The anomalies weren't just data points. They were the last faint reverberations of that fading melody trying to break through the engineer's silence. She looked at the fragmented schematics, the half-erased text, the ghost of a universal lattice. It was magnificent, terrifying, and achingly beautiful. A universe that was not merely observed, but deeply felt. And her people had traded that for certainty, for control, for a manageable but profoundly lonely existence. Alara closed her eyes, letting the simulated hum of the last archive wash over her. It was no longer just the sound of decay. It was the whisper of a colossal, sleeping being, a being that once cradled them all, connected them all, and was now perhaps stirring. Or perhaps it had been long gone, and all that remained were the spectral hints, beckoning her to reimagine very fabric of her reality. The quiet hum persisted, growing louder now, not just in the archive, but deep within her. It was the sound of a forgotten truth, rising from the digital grave, and it asked a terrible, magnificent question. If the web was real, if it was indeed a lattice of energy and consciousness, then what happened to it? And more importantly, could it ever be retuned? The thought hung in the digital air, fragile yet immense, a newly kindled spark in the boundless dark. The hum was constant, a low, barely perceptible vibration, emanating from the server farms miles beneath the city, a symphony of computational power that undergirded their entire existence. For Alara, alone in her cramped data-sifting cubicle, it was the only sound that truly penetrated the sterile silence of her world. Fluorescent lights cast a flat, unblinking glare on the polished ferrocrete walls, reflecting in the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. She wasn't an archaeologist unearthing ancient tablets, but a digital archivist, sifting through strata of forgotten data, seeking anomalies in the vast, curated ocean of public information. The official narrative was a fortress, meticulously constructed, but even the most perfectly engineered wall had a forgotten crack, a weathered seam. She pursued whispers, not actual sounds, but echoes and data trails, faint energetic signatures, discarded hypotheses too inconvenient to be fully scrubbed. Her current obsession, the almost mythical cosmic web, a concept vaguely referenced in apocryphal folktales and hushed academic conjectures, always followed by disclaimers about primitive understanding and pre-Enlightenment speculation. She spent cycles tracing keywords, cross-referencing discredited theories, diving deeper and deeper into the network's forgotten corners. Most paths led to dead ends, corrupted files, or the abrupt digital wall of a Class A information restriction. Then there it was, not a grand revelation, but a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the metadata of an archived astrophysical debate from nearly 3 centuries prior. A name flagged for historical curiosity, but with an undercurrent of official disapproval. Silas. The accompanying tags were tersive, reclusive theoretician, discredited hypotheses, eccentricity class 4th. It was the cosmic listener designation, however, that sent a shiver down Alara's spine, a feeling she rarely experienced in the cold logic of the network. A listener, someone who perhaps hadn't just looked, but truly listened to the universe. Further digging, carefully circumventing several layers of bureaucratic obfuscation, revealed the official story. Silas, a brilliant but deeply troubled astrophysicist from the early 21st century, had begun his career with groundbreaking work on dark matter distribution. But then something shifted. His papers grew more abstract, his data interpretations increasingly poetic, speaking of interstellar harmonics and universal resonance. He claimed to have found direct evidence of the cosmic web, not as a theoretical framework for a galactic distribution, but as an active, communicative entity, a living, breathing network of consciousness. The scientific community, at first intrigued, quickly became alarmed. His pronouncements became bolder, his methods less conventional. He spoke of listening stations deep within nebulae, of deciphering the universe's lament. He was deemed a pariah, his work labeled pseudoscience, delusional ramblings, a tragic decline of a once great mind. He was eventually ostracized, his research grants revoked, his access to official data networks severed. His entire body of work, all his observations, his theories, his personal notes, everything had been sealed away under the strictest Class Omega protocols, forever deemed a danger to the established order, a testament to what happened when scientific inquiry veered into dangerous mysticism. Alara's fingers hovered over the final link. Class Omega. It meant absolute, impenetrable, but the system had changed, evolved. Old protocols sometimes had unforeseen vulnerabilities when interfaced with newer algorithms, and she was an expert in finding those vulnerabilities. Not for sabotage, but for light, a quiet, patient probing, like water seeping through rock. She worked for hours, weaving through obsolete security matrices, exploiting forgotten encryption keys, building a delicate temporary bridge into the sealed archive. Her heart, a quiet drum against her ribs, quickened with a sense of illicit anticipation. It wasn't about defiance, not really. It was about truth. The official narrative held that the universe was a cold, indifferent place, governed by predictable laws, devoid of any overarching consciousness. But the opening hook of her story, the one that echoed in her own quiet longing, suggested otherwise. It hinted at a lost song, a silent web. Finally, the barrier yielded, not with a dramatic flash, but a soft, almost hesitant click. A single directory appeared. Silas J. Personal Archives and Unsanctioned Research. Within, neatly catalogued despite their forbidden nature, were digital scans of hundreds of pages, schematics for bizarre, intricate listening devices, astronomical charts annotated with unidentifiable symbols, and, most importantly, dozens of personal journals. They weren't just data logs, they were handwritten, the ink faded, the script elegant but sometimes frantic. She opened the first one. The pages breathed. A faint scent of old paper, of forgotten dust and starlight, seemed to emanate from the holographic projection. Silas's first entry was dated nearly 3 centuries ago, its words a ghost from a different epoch. Day 1. The silence is profound. Not the silence of a void, but of a holding breath. I feel it, a presence just beyond the veil of noise, beyond the static of cosmic microwave background. They say it's random, that the universe sings only the song of entropy, but I hear a melody beneath, a harmony lost, fractured. Elere scrolled each word a slow, deliberate step into Silas' mind. His early entries were rigorous scientific observations, meticulously detailing his attempts to filter out background radiation, to isolate specific frequency modulations that didn't conform to any known astrophysical phenomena. He described developing new instruments, resonance, attunement arrays, and gravitational wave harmonizers, which his peers had dismissed as fantastical. But it was when he started to succeed even in the smallest, most ephemeral ways that the journal shifted. The entries became less about empirical data and more about feeling. Day 187, a tremor, not in the instruments, but in my soul. A deep resonant hum, like the memory of a colossal bell. It came from beyond the Perseus arm, I'm certain. Not a star, not a galaxy. Something else, something vast. He wrote of the web with an almost spiritual reverence. He didn't just see it as a structural component of the universe, but as its very consciousness, its nervous system, its collective memory. He believed it was a network of sentient information, not transmitting data in the way humans understood it, but sharing being. They asked for proof. They asked for wavelengths, for amplitude, for empirical, repeatable metrics. How do you measure a sigh? How do you quantify a memory shared across light years? It is not a broadcast, but an omnipresent communion. The web does not send messages. It is the message, omnipresent, encompassing all thing, all time. His entries grew increasingly melancholic. He described brief, fleeting moments of contact not as distinct communication, but as a feeling of being enveloped, of understanding a profound, universal grief. The web, he surmised, was not silent because it had ceased to exist, but because it was sleeping or perhaps mourning. He believed humanity, in its frantic rush to conquer and categorize, had deafened itself to this omnipresent chorus, building its technological towers of Babel on an echo, unaware of the deep, silent current flowing beneath. The greatest tragedy is not the silence of the web, but our own inability to hear it. We are born deaf, blind, and profoundly alone in a universe that once cradled us. We mistake the emptiness for the truth. We built our cities on the graves of ancient songs, and now we wonder why our souls feel hollow. Elaine felt a profound ache settle in her chest. Silas's words resonated with the nameless longing that had always haunted her. His delusions were her deepest intuitions, articulated with heart-wrenching clarity. He spoke of the universe not as a cold mechanism, but as a living tapestry, now frayed and muted. He described the pain of its fading, the slow descent into cosmic loneliness, not just for humanity, but for the web itself. He wrote of the possibility of awakening it, of resonant frequencies that might stir the dormant consciousness. But his theories here grew vague, speculative, tinged with a desperate hope. He saw himself as a simple listener, a chronicler of a cosmic tragedy, one of the last few who remembered the hum of a lost symphony. His final entries were a lament, a whispered elegy for a connection humanity had severed, perhaps irrevocably. I am a ghost listening to ghosts. The stars blink, the galaxies spin, but the true light has dimmed. We are adrift, yes, but not in emptiness. We are adrift in a profound, unacknowledged silence, surrounded by the echoes of a song we have forgotten how to sing. I can only write and listen, and hope that one day another will hear the whisper that I hear. Closing the journal, Elara sat back, the artificial glow of her screen a stark contrast to the vast, melancholic universe Silas had unveiled. His work, once dismissed as madness, now felt like the only sanity she had encountered. He hadn't just theorized about the cosmic web. He had felt it, mourned it, and in doing so had left a breadcrumb trail for anyone brave or desperate enough to follow. She wasn't just searching for a lost connection anymore. She was searching for the melody of a universe that had once sung, and perhaps, with enough quiet listening, might sing again. The hum of the server farms now seemed louder, a cacophony drowning out a far more important silence. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that her journey had only just begun. The whispers of Silas had become her own. The quiet hum of Alara's dwelling was a familiar ghost, a low, steady thrum against the backdrop of an otherwise silent world. It was the whisper of air purifiers, the sigh of data servers tucked into the wall, the distant, muffled pulse of the city's lifeblood. But tonight, that mundane hum felt like a deliberate intrusion, a tinny, shallow mimicry of the deeper, older resonant Silas had chased. She sat amidst the curated chaos of his study, her fingers tracing the brittle edges of antique data slates and the yellowed leaves of a notebook filled with his elegant, spidery script. Silas, always a step beyond, always listening for a note no one else could hear. After he vanished, leaving only the enigmatic archives, the world has simply shrugged, dismissing him as another brilliant mind consumed by the vast, unfeeling void. But Alara knew better. She felt the echo of his conviction, a faint vibration in the stillness of the room. His early entries were a scattershot of astronomical observations, overlaid with complex, almost artistic diagrams. Star clusters weren't just gravitational dance partners. He sketched them as shimmering nodes. Filaments of Galaxies weren't merely structural bridges. They were conduits, lines of force, pathways. He called them the cosmic weave, a term Alara had always considered a beautiful, poetic metaphor for the universe's grand design. Most scientists did. The idea of the universe as a vast, interconnected neural network was a romantic, philosophical notion, not a literal blueprint. Until now, she found a series of heavily annotated schematics tucked away beneath layers of more conventional astrophysical models. They weren't theories of how the universe might be connected, but rather detailed analyses of how it was. Silas had painstakingly mapped the distribution of dark matter, not just as an invisible scaffold, but as an active substrate. His notes spoke of resonant frequencies emanating from galactic cores, of quantum entanglement phenomena extending across light years, not as theoretical possibilities, but as observed, measurable realities. We look for waves, for particles, for signals within our limited spectrum. One entry read, his handwriting unusually firm, almost urgent. But what if the message isn't transmitted, but inherent? What if the fabric itself vibrates with information? What if dark matter isn't just filler, but the very medium of thought for something unimaginably vast? Alara leaned back, a shiver tracing its way up her spine. The air in the room, usually sterile and recycled, suddenly felt thick with possibility, or perhaps with a forgotten presence. She recalled the opening hook's whisper, the silent thought shared across cosmic distances, long before humanity ever looked up in wonder. Was this what Silas meant? His later notes became less academic, more introspective, almost feverish. He wasn't just observing. He was attempting to listen. He spoke of faint, irregular pulses had detected, not electromagnetic, not gravitational, but something entirely new, a kind of cosmic resonance, feedback. He described it as a dying breath, a fading song, the last whispers of a conversation that had spanned epochs. It's not a metaphor, Alara murmured aloud, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate in the vast silence. Her own voice sounded foreign, like an echo from a distant cave. The cosmic wham wasn't a poetic description of literal, ancient, intergalactic information. Network, a grand symphony of creation, as the old saying went, but one that had, according to Silas, largely fallen silent. She saw it then with a startling clarity that felt less like discovery and more like remembering. The universe wasn't just a collection of isolated stars and planets. but a vast, sprawling nervous system. Galaxies were its colossal brains, nebulae its intricate synapses, and the dark matter filaments its nerve pathways, carrying streams of data, consciousness, perhaps even emotion across the unimaginable emptiness. And humanity, in its arrogant youth, built its entire civilization on the false premise of isolation, of being uniquely self-contained. Silas had drawn parallels between this ancient cosmic network and the internet humanity had constructed for itself. He called it the local patchwork, a term dripping with a melancholic irony. Our global networks, with their fiber optic cables and satellite relays, our constant stream of data, our illusion of being universally connected. It was all just a tiny, degraded shard, a broken piece of a far grander, lost connection. We've built our homes on a forgotten battlefield. One entry read, scrawled furiously across a page. Our routers are crude imitations of universal notes. Our bandwidth is a trickling faucet compared to the cosmic deluge. We speak of big data, but we are deaf to the real data, the very song of existence that once thrummed through every atom of the cosmos. Elara felt a profound ache settle in her chest, a nameless longing that resonated with the opening hook's question. What if we built our entire world on echoes, on the forgotten grand symphony of creation, and never even truly knew what we lost? Silas had known, or at least he had suspected with a terrifying certainty. He described moments of brief, almost imperceptible flares in his data, like dying embers briefly reigniting. These weren't random cosmic events, he theorized, but the network attempting to self-repair, or perhaps to send out one last, desperate signal. He speculated about why it went silent. Was it age, a cataclysm, a deliberate shutdown by an intelligence beyond human comprehension? Or had it simply, slowly faded, like a magnificent, ancient forest starved of light? The dystopian undertones of this revelation pressed in on her. Humanity, proud of its technological prowess, its global connectivity, was merely playing in the ruins of something infinitely superior, blissfully unaware. Our current systems, limited, noisy, and prone to endless failures, were nothing more than a child's toy radio, picking up static from a fallen celestial choir. We thought we were connected, always, by 1,000 threads of data and shared experience. But what if the greatest connection we ever had, the very fabric weaving through the universe, went silent? She ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of an old data slate. Its screen dark now, but its memory holding Silas' final, most heart-wrenching observation. We are not just alone, as we once feared. We are profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled us all. And the silence is not empty. It is pregnant with the ghost of 1,000 billion forgotten voices, all yearning for the melody that faded before our time. Ellara closed her eyes, the gentle hum of her dwelling now sounding like a cheap, synthetic drone. The opening hook's final question echoed in her mind. What if we're not just alone, but profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled us all? The question was no longer hypothetical. It was a chilling, undeniable truth, whispered from the grave of a lost cosmos, and now finally heard. And with that truth came a terrible, crushing weight of loneliness, a sadness not just for humanity, but for the entire silent universe. She was left with a profound, aching question, but now she knew what it truly meant. What did one do when confronted with the echoes of a lost God? What did one do when realizing the very universe had once been alive with thought? And now only ghost whispers remain. The silence stretched vast and terrifying, promising answers she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. The hum that greeted Ellara was unlike any she had ever known. It was not the familiar, predictable drone of the city's omnipresent data streams, nor the cool, efficient pulse of her lab's life support. This hum was ancient, nascent, a low resonant thrum that seemed to emanate not from the air, but from the very bone beneath her skin. It started softly, a phantom echo, as she worked, her fingers tracing the faded, almost illegible schematic Silas had left behind. His instructions were a puzzle in themselves, a strange melange of cryptic notations and sprawling, elegant diagrams scrawled across ancient data pads. They spoke of crystalline conductors and harmonic alignment, terms that sounded more like forgotten poetry than applied physics. Elara, a woman who lived by the clean logic of algorithms and the precise beauty of quantum mechanics, found herself wrestling with a language that felt older than recorded history. Yet there was an undeniable pull, a whisper in the back of her mind that urged her on, a strange intuition she hadn't known she possessed. She scavenged for parts, not from the gleaming stores of the corporate conglomerates, but from forgotten corners of abandoned research facilities, dusty attics of long-dead specialists, and even the subterranean junkyards rumored to hold fragments of ruin. The pre-collapse era. There, amidst the detritus of a forgotten technological age, she found them, tarnished copper wire spun with the almost mythical purity of galactic silver, raw, unpolished, resonant crystals that sang with a faint internal light, and intricate, delicate components whose purpose was a mystery, but whose form resonated with the diagrams. The resonance conduit took shape in the quiet isolation of her hidden chamber, a space usually reserved for the most intricate and sensitive of her quantum experiments. It was a peculiar contraption, rudimentary in its construction, yet impossibly complex in its design. A central helix of the strange silver-copper alloy spiraling upwards was cradled by a lattice of the rough-hewn crystals, each one humming faintly when touched. Fine, almost invisible filamentary wires connected them, forming an intricate web that shimmered with an inner luminescence. It looked less like a scientific instrument and more like a piece of cosmic art, something born of starlight and dream, utterly alien to the utilitarian aesthetics of her dystopian world. Finally, it was done. A single, almost invisible power conduit snaked from her personal generator, a low-frequency power source Silas had insisted upon, and connected to the base of the helix. Her breath hitched. There was no on switch, no digital interface. The instructions simply indicated that when the energy flowed, the dormant song would awaken. She hesitated, a tremor running through her hands. What if it was nothing? What if it was a trick, a hallucination, a final cruel joke from a man she barely knew, whose existence was itself a mystery? Yet the nameless longing, that ache for the fading melody described in the ancient text, pushed her forward. With a deep breath, Ilara activated the generator. The chamber remained silent for a long, drawn-out moment. Then the central helix began to glow, a soft ethereal azure that pulsed with a rhythm too slow for a heartbeat, too fast for the turning of a planet. The crystals around it caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the walls, lending the room the surreal beauty of a nebula in miniature. And then the hum returned, stronger this time, not just in her bones but in the air, a vibration that felt less like sound and more like pure, undiluted presence. Elara reached out, her fingers trembling, and placed them lightly on the base of one of the shimmering crystals. It was not sound that entered her, nor sight, nor touch. It was everything at once, a synesthetic cascade that tore through her senses, bypassing her conscious mind and plunging directly into the deepest wellsprings of her being. The first sensations were of immense, beautiful tranquility. She was no longer in her lab, no longer a woman tethered to a dying planet. She was the vastness she saw, or rather felt, the delicate, intricate dance of light years spanning filaments, the cosmic web itself. It wasn't a static structure, but a living, breathing entity constantly shifting, exchanging, communicating. Then came the snippets. They flashed not like images on a screen, but like memories not her own, deeply etched into the fabric of reality. She witnessed, For a timeless moment, the shimmering bioluminescent cities of a civilization that built its entire existence within the swirling nebulae of a distant galaxy. Their forms were fluid, their thoughts communicated through choruses of light and shifting colors. She felt their joy, a pure, unadulterated ecstasy of collective consciousness, exploring the endless possibilities of existence, expanding not through conquest, but through harmonious integration with the cosmic flow. Their art was the creation of new stars, their philosophy the silent contemplation of universal patterns. It was breathtaking, a vision of what life could be, a profound sadness settling in her heart for the stark contrast with humanity's own fractured, fearful existence. The vision dissolved, replaced by a sudden, terrifying expanse of utter darkness. She felt the crushing weight of forces beyond comprehension, the silent, inexorable pull of supermassive black holes devouring light, space, and time itself. She experienced the birth and death of suns in a single, agonizing instant, the raw, indifferent violence of creation and annihilation. There were glimpses of ancient cosmic events, the genesis of Galaxies, the slow, majestic unfurling of spiral arms, the first whispers of intelligent life blossoming on primordial worlds. It was terrifying in its scale, humbling in its indifference, showing her the terrifying, beautiful fragility of all things, including her own species. A chill, colder than the vacuum of space, ran through her. Humanity was not merely small. It was a fleeting thought, in an ancient, indifferent cosmic dream. Then came the thoughts, the pure, undiluted stream of consciousness that transcended language, image, and emotion. They were not human thoughts. They were existential questions and answers woven into the fabric of reality itself, concepts that fractured her mind. Even as they expanded it, she understood for a fleeting, agonizing second the nature of parallel universes, not as theoretical constructs, but as tangible realities, vibrating alongside her own. She grasped the concept of time as a multidimensional tapestry, not a linear progression. She felt the interconnectedness of every particle, every being, every being, a grand, silent symphony where every note played its part, even the ones long forgotten. We are all reflections of the same light, distorted by the lenses of our perception, a thought echoed, formless and ancient. Consciousness is not an emergent property. It is the fundamental medium of existence. Another resonated, shaking her to her core. Void is not absence, but potential, pregnant with every song unsung. A third whispered, and a deep, aching sadness swelled within her, for she knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that humanity had forgotten how to listen. The data streamed too fast, too intensely. Her mind reeled, stretched taut across light years and epochs, threatening to tear apart. She was no longer a Lara. She was a conduit, a vessel for a universe of forgotten knowledge, a speck of dust trying to contain the entire ocean. The beautiful and the terrifying coalesced, became one overwhelming, luminous dread. She felt the echoes of long-dead civilizations, their final silent pleas for understanding, their unanswered questions, their own profound, aching loneliness after the song had faded. She felt their hopes, their failures, their ultimate dissolution into the cosmic dust, all interwoven with the vibrant, endless possibilities of other, living worlds. Her head throbbed, a pressure building behind her eyes as if the universe itself was trying to burst forth from her skull. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound lost in the resonant hum that now filled her entire being. The clarity was too much, the truth too vast. She was drowning in light, in silence, in the overwhelmed, devastating knowledge of what had been lost. With a desperate, animalistic cry, Alara tore her hand away from the crystal. The hum did not immediately cease, But it softened, receding like an outgoing tide. The azure glow of the helix faded, the rainbows vanished, and the profound silence of her chamber returned, heavier, deeper, more desolate than before. Elara crumpled to the floor, shivering, gasping for air that felt thin and insubstantial. The snippets were gone, but their echoes lingered, imprinted on the very fabric of her consciousness. Her vision of the world had irrevocably shifted. The walls of her lab seemed to press in, small and insignificant. The city outside, with its endless data streams and fabricated connections, felt like a pathetic, flickering candle against the backdrop of an infinite, silent void. She was still Ilara, but she was also something more, something profoundly broken and undeniably awakened. The nameless longing was no longer nameless. It had a voice, 1,000 voices, 1,000 lost songs, all whispering in the profound, aching silence that now defined her world. She knew, with chilling certainty, that humanity was not just alone. It was profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled them all. And now she carried the heavy, beautiful burden of that truth. The quiet hum that had drawn Ilara deeper than she knew possible faded, not into silence, but into a profound, aching void. It was as if the universe itself had just exhaled a breath held for eons, leaving only the chill of its absence. The knowledge she had sought, that nameless longing for a melody hinted at in ancient whispers, had not come as a burst of light or a triumphant revelation. Instead, it had settled upon her like cosmic dust, each particle a fragment of what was, what might have been, and what was irrevocably gone. She lay suspended, not in physical space, but within the boundless architecture of her own mind, the echoes of the cosmic download still reverberating through her neurons. Her body, wherever it was anchored in the mundane reality of her habitat, felt distant, a forgotten vessel on a shore she no longer recognized. What she had glimpsed, what had imprinted itself onto her very essence, was not comforting. It was the stark, unvarnished truth of a universe she had only ever known as a pale imitation. The cosmic web, they called it, a vast, intricate lattice of galaxies and dark matter, once believed to be merely a structural scaffolding for the universe. But the truth, the sorrowful, whispered truth Alara now carried, was that it had been so much more. It had been a living, breathing symphony, not just a network of gravity and light, but a tapestry woven with consciousness, an intergalactic thought space where information, energy, and perhaps even pure being had flowed unimpeded. Every star, every nebula, every nascent intelligence had once contributed to a grand, intricate song, a harmonious exchange that transcended the limited bandwidth of the human mind. She saw it not with her eyes, but with a deeper, more primal sense, swirling currents of cosmic thought, brighter than 1,000 suns, traversing the filaments, galaxies, not merely isolated islands, but nodes in a vast, intelligent network, communicating, sharing, evolving together. The gentle hum, the whisper from the opening hook, was not just a metaphor. It was the faint ghost of that ancient cosmic chorus. And then the silence, a disease perhaps, or a natural entropic decay on a scale so grand it defied comprehension. Hilary felt the shudder of it, the gradual dimming of cosmic light, the gradual quieting of celestial voices. The web, once vibrant and alive, had not collapsed, but simply stopped singing. Its intricate structures remained the skeletal framework of what was, but the spirit, the consciousness, the grand connection had bled away, leaving behind it the husks of its former glory. This was the profound cosmic loneliness. It wasn't merely that humanity was alone in the universe. It was that the universe itself was alone. The cosmic tapestry, once intricately connected, was now frayed threads, drifting apart, each star a solitary ember in an unfeeling void. The vast scale of what had been lost crushed her, a weight far heavier than any black hole. She saw civilizations, once vibrant participants in the cosmic dialogue, now isolated, either withered and gone, or still clinging to life on their desolate planets, unknowingly adrift on the silent currents of a dead network. Humanity, with its frantic attempts at connection, its digital webs and global networks, suddenly seemed pathetically small, a child playing with strings while the universe grieved its lost symphony. We had built our entire world on echoes, on the faint, distorted reverberations of a song that ended long before our species drew its first breath. The concept of connection that defined their dystopian society. The constant data stream, the forced communal thought, the illusion of shared experience, was a grotesque parody of what the universe once was, a desperate manufactured substitute for a lost reality. The ephemeral nature of all existence within the silent web settled upon her as a heavy, sorrowful burden. If something as grand and fundamental as the living cosmic web could fade, if its very essence could unravel into cosmic dust and silence, then what hope was there for anything else? Planets, stars, civilizations, even the most cherished memories, all were but fleeting sparks in an eternal night. The universe, in its ultimate truth, was a testament to impermanence. Everything beautiful, everything connected, everything vibrant, was destined to become a whisper, then a memory, then nothing at all. Her understanding of reality buckle, then shatter. The reassuring hum of the city, once a constant presence, now felt like a desperate, frantic noise, trying to fill an unfillable void. The distant thrum of the network, the very backbone of their controlled existence, seemed to mock her with its superficiality. What was the point of building, of striving, of creating, if the very fabric of creation itself was prone to such a profound existential decay? The stars outside, once distant, sparkling beacons of wonder, now looked like lonely sentinels, each a mute testament to a lost conversation. They were not connected, not truly. They were merely points of light, suspended in a boundless ocean of silence, unaware, perhaps long past caring, that the grand song had ended. Elara felt herself unraveling, the boundaries between her own consciousness and the vast, sorrowful emptiness of the cosmos blurring. It was not despair, not exactly. It was something far deeper, a melancholic acceptance of an incomprehensible truth, a quiet resignation to the fact that they were all, every single one of them, merely dancing in the afterglow, mistaking the lingering warmth for the true fire. A tear, warm and impossibly heavy, traced a path down her cheek. It was a human tear, a small, insignificant ripple in the cosmic silence. Yet it carried the weight of a universe that had forgotten how to sing, and in that moment, Elara knew with chilling certainty. The greatest mystery of the cosmic web was not what they still didn't know, but the profound, heartbreaking scale of what they had already lost, and what they could never ever recover. She was not just alone, she was profoundly, cosmically adrift, and the terrible silence was now a part of her, a forever echo in her soul. She felt it, sometimes, like a phantom limp ache in the soul, a space within her that yearned for something vast, something she'd never known but instinctively mourned. Nexus City, in its relentless, crystalline order, had always been a kind of opiate, a constant, low-frequency hum designed to drown out deeper frequencies. But now, with the fragile tendrils of a new understanding taking root in her mind, the city's hum no longer soothed. It screamed. The city, sprawling beneath the perpetual twilight cast by its atmospheric regulators, used to be a marvel, a meticulously calibrated machine of living, breathing, efficient existence. Every transit line pulsed with perfect timing. Every nutrient cycle flowed with programmed precision. Every citizen's biometric profile was woven into the grand tapestry of the central consensus. It was a fortress against chaos, a sanctuary of control. She had, like all others, accepted its narrative that humanity, in its wisdom, had chosen this path towards ultimate stability, ultimate connectivity. But the new knowing was a cruel, beautiful unveiling. It was like finally seeing the invisible threads that held a marionette or hearing the silent, grinding gears beneath a grand, effortless performance. Nexus City wasn't a triumph of societal evolution. It was a scar, a meticulously constructed mausoleum of what was lost. The silence, the true silence of the cosmos, was not merely an absence of sound. It was an absence of connection. Not the data streams that crisscrossed Nexus City like hyperactive synapses, nor the curated emotional feedback loops that promised contentment. No, it was the primal, energetic hum of the cosmic web itself, the interwoven fabric that had once cradled existence, carried thought, whispered meaning across unimaginable gulfs. It was the ancient psalm, the grand symphony of creation, now utterly, irrevocably muted. And Nexus City, in its magnificent, suffocating design, was humanity's grand collective flinch. She traced the cool, polished surface of her window panel, watching the distant, luminous towers pierce the synthetic sky. Each building, a monument to human ingenuity, now felt like a desperate, trembling hand cupping a flickering candle against an infinite, terrifying gale. The order, the meticulous control, was not born of foresight, but of profound terror. The terror of the void, the terror of discovering just how truly alone they were, how utterly adrift without the vast, silent web that had once given meaning to the very act of being. It was a retreat, a collective turning away. Imagine a child overwhelmed by a terrifying storm outside, pulling a thick blanket over their head, convinced that if they cannot see the storm, it cannot touch them. Nexus City was that blanket, its boundaries, its controlled climate, its curated experiences, its omnipresent network that linked every thought and action. It was all a desperate attempt to create an internal universe, a self-sustaining echo chamber, in the face of an external, devastating emptiness. The vastness that had once inspired wonder had become, in the wake of the cosmic silence, an overwhelming threat, a reminder of an absence too profound to bear. And so, humanity had collectively, unconsciously decided to shrink, to pull inward, to construct an elaborate, beautiful cage, and call it paradise. The meticulously engineered utopia was, in fact, a dystopia of the soul, a self-imposed exile from a truth too painful to confront. She saw it in the faces of the citizens, those placid, contented expressions, unmarred by existential dread. They moved through their routines with an elegant, almost dreamlike precision. Their thoughts guided, their emotions modulated. They were connected, yes, by the thousands of threads of data and shared experience that Nexus City so proudly boasted. But it was a manufactured connection, a pale imitation of the deep, silent thoughts shared across cosmic distances. They were connected to each other, but profoundly disconnected from the universe itself. And in that disconnection lay the deepest sorrow. The societal failure wasn't in its economic model or its political structure. Though those were flawed, it was in the very core of its being, its denial. Nexus City wasn't just living in the afterglow of that ancient song. It was actively trying to forget the song had ever existed. It was building a new synthetic melody, convincing itself it was just as good, just as profound as the original Grand Symphony. A deep ache settled in her chest. This wasn't merely intellectual understanding. It was an emotional resonance, a sudden, blinding empathy for the entire human race. For all the centuries they had spent constructing this elaborate shell, this gleaming, humming fortress against the void, it was an act of profound, unconscious grief, a species-wide trauma manifesting as hyper-order and suffocating control. The painful, overwhelming truth they collectively turned away from wasn't just the silence itself, but what that silence implied. It implied a fragility, a smallness, a cosmic insignificance that was unbearable. It implied that their very existence, once part of a vast, interconnected tapestry, was now just a lonely, unraveling thread drifting in an ocean of nothingness. They had built their entire world on echoes, on the forgotten melody, and in doing so had unconsciously accepted a life of profound, aching questions they refused to vocalize, even to themselves. The precision of the automated cleaners gliding across the promenade, the synchronized light patterns shifting across the city's highest spire, the gentle, lulling rhythm of the air purifiers, all of it now felt like a desperate lullaby. A lullaby sung to a terrified child, whispering, "Sleep, little one. Ignore the darkness. Dream of order. Dream of connection, even if it is only with yourself and your own carefully constructed cage." She closed her eyes. The phantom ache intensified. The city, once a symbol of humanity's future, now felt like its eternal prison. And the heaviest burden of her new understanding was the crushing weight of knowing that most of its inhabitants, adrift in their carefully curated realities, would never even truly know what they had lost. They were not just alone, but cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that had once cradled them all, and of the grand, tragic illusion they now called home. Imagine a quiet hum, not the relentless buzz of city lights or the distant thrum of your local network, but something far older, deeper. A whisper carried across the unimaginable emptiness between stars. A silent thought shared across cosmic distances, long before humanity ever looked up in wonder. We live in the afterglow now, a pale, flickering imitation of that ancient song. They tell us we are connected always by 1,000 threads of data and shared experience. But what if the greatest connection we ever had, the very fabric weaving through the universe, went silent? What if we built our entire world on echoes, on the forgotten, grand symphony of creation, and never even truly knew what we lost? This isn't just about what's out there, beyond the reach of our most powerful telescopes. This is about what's inside us, a nameless longing for a melody that faded before our time, leaving us with a profound, aching question. What if we're not just alone, but profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast, silent web that once cradled us all? The city slept in its manufactured glow, a blanket of perpetual twilight woven from data streams and regulated light. Alara did not sleep. She traced the faded schematics Silas had left, fragments shimmering like lost constellations on her ancient, unnetworked slate. Each line was a ghost of purpose, each symbol a forgotten dialect. The 0 point, Silas had whispered its name like a secret held too long. A vulnerability he'd passed on with his last breath. He'd called it a tear, a wound in the fabric of an engineered reality, where the threads of the true cosmic web, those ancient silent pathways, still frayed and pulsed with a raw, undeniable energy. Strongest, Head said, and most volatile. A dangerous gift. The hum was in her ears again, not the city's electric thrum, but a phantom resonance, a memory of a sound she had never heard. It was the same silent whisper that drew her to the forgotten places, to the edges where the city's meticulous grid began to fray. Silas' clues were not direct, but intuitive, like a path revealed in a dream. Coordinates that shifted with the city's slow, tectonic crawl, obscured by layers of disused infrastructure, old code, and the deliberate neglect, nebulously mandated narrative of their self-sufficient, data-saturated world. She found it not on any official map, but in the echoes of an older city, a pre-collapsed metropolis buried beneath the polished surfaces and gleaming towers. Silas' final message, a string of fractured images and soundless whispers, had led her here, to the forgotten service tunnels beneath Sector 7, a district now famed for its serene greenways and manicured parks, built upon the bones of what was once a bustling industrial hub. It was here, he implied, that the city's carefully constructed boundaries thinned to nothing. The air grew heavy as she descended, a cold dampness clinging to her skin. The city's pervasive, synthetic scent of ozone and recycled air gave way to the metallic tang of rust and the earthy smell of deep concrete. Her path wound through abandoned maintenance conduits, their luminescent strips long dead, leaving her to navigate by the weak, flickering beam of her handheld pipes, thick as ancient tree trunks, snaked across the ceilings, their purpose long forgotten. Dust motes danced in her light, each a tiny transient star in the silent gloom. This was the city's forgotten infrastructure, its arterial system left to calcify, choked by its own disuse. She thought of the stories she'd heard, hushed whispers of the great cosmic web. The universal language had gone silent. Humanity, cut adrift, had begun to build its own fragile web, a network of data and manufactured connections, believing it was enough. But Silas knew. He'd seen the emptiness behind the veil, the profound absence, and now so did Ella Ray in her quiet moments, in the insistent longing that pulsed beneath her ribs. The walls grew rougher, the concrete giving way to exposed rock, an intrusion of the natural world beneath the artificial. It felt as though she was peeling back layers of a dream, revealing the harsher, truer ground beneath. She passed relics of a forgotten era, terminals, their screens cracked and dark, covered in a fine layer of silicon dust, archaic power conduits, thick cables like petrified vines. Each artifact was a tombstone to a forgotten ambition, a different way of being connected. They represented the city's self-imposed technological boundaries, not just physical walls, but a collective turning away from what they couldn't control, couldn't quantify. These boundaries weren't always visible. Sometimes they were just frequencies, silent bands of data that prohibited specific wavelengths, blocking out certain knowledge. Other times they were structural, entire sections of the city deemed non-essential, allowed to decay into unreachable forgotten spaces. But the deepest boundary Lara felt was in the minds of the people themselves, a quiet resignation to their contained reality, a fear of the vast, unknowable beyond. She reached a circular chamber, unexpectedly vast, its dome ceiling lost in shadow. In the center, a pedestal. On it, a device unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't sleek or polished or designed for a human interface. It was raw, almost organic, a tangle of obsidian like crystal and age-tarnished metal. It pulsed with a faint internal light, a deep violet that seemed to absorb more light than it emitted, create a pocket of profound shadow around itself. This was it. The 0 point, Silas's voice, a memory echo, resonated in her mind. It's unstable. Elera, a direct conduit, too much, too fast, and it could unravel you. Or worse, unravel what's left of us. She approached the pedestal slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air here was different, charged, not with electricity, but with something older, a resonance that vibrated in her bones. It felt like standing at the very edge of a deep well, gazing into a darkness that promised both answers and oblivion. The violet light pulsed, mirroring her own heartbeat, or perhaps sensing with something far grander, far more ancient. Here, the hum wasn't a phantom anymore. It was real, a low, resonant thrum that filled the chamber, a sound that bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her soul. It was the sound of the universe breathing, a melody of creation that had faded for so long, now just barely audible through this fragile, unstable nexus. It carried a profound sadness, a lament for all that had been lost, for all that had been forgotten. But beneath the sorrow there was also a silent promise, a whisper of connection, of belonging. Elara reached out a trembling hand, not to touch the device, but to feel the current of air around it. It felt like silk, like the finest threads of a forgotten tapestry, pulled taut across an unimaginable distance. This was the true cosmic web, or a glimpse of its raw, exposed nerve. She stood at the threshold, not of a door, but of a question that had been waiting for humanity since the first silent echo died, and now, finally, perhaps, an answer. The city's lights, its data streams, its carefully constructed reality, all seemed to recede, distant and insignificant. Here, in the forgotten heart of their engine world, the universe hummed, and Elara, for the first time, felt truly, terrifyingly connected. The 0 point was not a place of light but of absence. It was the negative space between the echoes, the quiet in the heart of a scream that had long since faded. Here the air itself seemed to hold its breath, thin and sharp like a memory too painful to fully recall. Elara stood, or perhaps floated, suspended in a consciousness that felt less like her own and more like a fragile boat on an infinite sea. Before her the conduit pulsed, not with light, but with a deep resonant thrum that vibrated through the very marrow of her bones, a rhythm that bypassed her ears and spoke directly to the dreaming parts of her mind. It was the heartbeat of something ancient, something dying, or perhaps something merely sleeping. She had approached it, drawn by an ache she couldn't name, a hollow space within her that yearned for a missing chord in the universe's song. Now, pressed against its unseen membrane, she felt the first tendrils of the silent web reach for her. It wasn't information in the way her society understood it. Crisp data stream, neatly categorized narratives. This was raw, untamed essence. It poured into her not as a flood, but as an infinitely slow, infinitely vast tide. Each particle of what she perceived was a universe in itself, a compressed galaxy of forgotten stars, the birth and death of nebulae, the silent dance of dark matter. It was the truth, unvarnished and overwhelming. The universe was not empty. It was full of a profound, aching silence. What humanity perceived as the void was merely the deafening aftermath of a cosmic symphony that had ceased. She felt the grand design, the intricate lattice of consciousness that once wove through the very fabric of existence, a living, breathing connection that sang across light years. And then she felt the cessation, not a sudden, violent tearing, but a gradual dimming, a slow, gentle letting go, like a lover's hand slipping from hers in a waking dream. The whisper grew. It was not a voice, but a collective memory, a phantom limb ache of a universe that had once known itself as whole. It showed her worlds linked by thought alone, civilizations sharing the deepest currents of their being, not through clumsy machines, but through the inherent resonance of existence. And then the silence, a vast echoing chasm where that melody once played. Humanity, she realized, had built its cities, its networks, its entire civilization on the calcified remnants of that silence. They were dancing on a cosmic graveyard, mistaking the dust for fresh soil, the echoes for the original song. The conduit throbbed, a low, insistent drum against the fragile walls of her mind. The choice, whispered into existence by the silent web itself, began to unfold before her. An unbearable dichotomy. To fully embrace this truth, to let the vast ancient whispers consume her, would mean to dissolve, to become a part of the web's memory, to wander its silent, star-dusted corridors forever. A ghost among forgotten harmonies. She would no longer be a lair, she would be a thread, rewoven into a tapestry that had long since lost its loom. Her individuality, her small, contained sorrow, her specific longings, all of it would be swallowed, becoming merely another note in a lost chord, a drop in an ocean of forgotten tears. The pull was immense, seductive in its promise of understanding, to know everything, to truly feel the universe beyond the limitations of flesh and finite thought. It was a liberation, a terrifying communion with the ultimate reality. But it was also an annihilation. The beauty of it was woven with the dread of self-extinction. Her mind, still stubbornly anchored to the familiar, offered a counterpoint. It was the memory of her small, sunlit apartment, the way dust motes danced in the morning light, the quiet hum of the city's life support systems, a sound that, until now, she'd found melancholic, but suddenly seemed a comforting, predictable drone. The familiar faces in the street, each with their own contained sorrows, their own small hopes, blissfully unaware of the cosmic tragedy unfolding around them, within them. This was the melancholic ignorance, the soft cocoon of not knowing. To retreat would be to return to that world, to embrace the comfortable lie, to live out her days in the afterglow, forever haunted by the shadow of she had glimpsed at the 0 point. She would be Aurora, yes, but forever changed, forever burdened by the knowledge of the universe's true silence, and her own species' profound cosmic adriftness. It would be a lonely existence, yet it would be hers. A vision flashed, the face of an old woman, her grandmother, humming a tuneless lullaby, her eyes distant, lost in a private, unspoken grief. Was that grief a faint echo of the silent web, a deep-seated, inherited memory of a connection lost generations ago? Or was it merely the human condition, an inherent sadness independent of cosmic scale? The conduit pulsed again, slower now, deeper, as if sensing her hesitation. It was not pushing, not demanding, but simply presenting the vast infinite choice, a choice between an overwhelming, terrifying truth that would unmake her, and a comfortable, albeit sorrowful, ignorance that would preserve the fragile vessel of herself. The cosmic memory, heavy with the weight of untold eons, pressed against her, a silent plea, a profound offering, to become one with the universe's profound longing, or to remain a solitary echo, forever listening for a song she could no longer hear. The 0 point held her in its breath, suspended between two infinities, two forms of oblivion. Her existence, her very essence, hung in the balance, a single trembling thought caught between the whisper of the silent web and the soft, sad hum of her human world. A quiet hum, not of the external world, but one that resonated deep within Elara's skull, was all that remained after the interface closed. It was the phantom echo of data, not the clarity of a discovery, but the profound silence left in its wake. She sat, still tethered by invisible threads to the console, in the muted glow of the observation chamber. Outside the viewport, the sterile, manufactured constellations of the station's grid pulsed with their programmed, predictable light. They were a poor imitation of the true sky, the one her ancestors had gazed upon, the one that now felt both infinitely distant and terribly close. She had sought the missing pieces of the cosmic web, the whispers, the currents, the symphonies of cosmic understanding that were said to have once woven the universe into a tapestry of interconnected consciousness. What she found, or rather, what she glimpsed, was not the data itself, but the chasm of its absence. It wasn't just a data loss, it was a cosmic amputation. The information she'd accessed wasn't about what was, but about wasn't, and the sheer, unimaginable scale of that void made her own existence feel like a speck of dust clinging to the edge of a forgotten dream. The architects of this current human existence, the ones who promised boundless connection through their omnipresent network, had always portrayed the universe as a grand puzzle, solvable piece by piece, but Elara now understood it differently. It wasn't a puzzle missing a few edge pieces. It was a canvas, vast and ancient, where once a vibrant masterpiece bloomed, and now only the faintest, faded outlines remained, hints of colors that had long since leached into the ether. And humanity, in its ceaseless striving, was merely trying to repaint a corner, unaware of the original artist's vision, or even that an artist had ever existed. What if the mystery was not in finding the lost song, but in realizing that its melody was so grand, so overwhelming, that it would shatter the fragile vessels we call our minds. She remembered the sensation of the fragmented data pulsing through her consciousness, not images or words, but pure, raw information about connection, about an almost telepathic communion across light years. It was like trying to hold the entire ocean in a cupped hand. The sheer pressure threatened to burst her seams. Her mind recoiled, not from horror, but from an unbearable beauty, a scale of existence so vast it made human endeavor, human love, human suffering, seem like the ephemeral flickers of fireflies on a cosmic night. She closed her eyes, and a dreamlike vision unfolded behind her lids. Not a memory, for how could it be, but an echo, a resonance of what could have been. She saw, or rather felt, threads of light, not just from stars, but from beings, stretching across the dark. A lattice thought, a hum of shared existence, binding everything. There was no other in this vision, only aspects of a greater whole, vibrating with a unified purpose that transcended survival or conquest. This was the ancient song, the forgotten, grand symphony of creation the old texts hinted at, not as a metaphor, but as a living, breathing, conscious network. And then, just as quickly, the vision fractured. The threads snapped one by one, not with violence, but with a slow, agonizing dissipation, like morning mist evaporating under a too bright sun. The shared thought receded, leaving behind pockets of isolated consciousness, each suddenly profoundly alone, staring at the vast emptiness that had once been a familiar embrace. This was the moment of cosmic silence, the genesis of the afterglow humanity now inhabited, a fading warmth from a sun that had set eons ago, leaving us to construct our own smaller, more manageable suns out of artificial light and manufacture. Data streams, a profound sorrow, heavy and ancient, settled over Alera. It wasn't merely the sadness of loss, but the weight of unknowing, the crushing realization that what humanity didn't know far surpassed anything it ever could. And perhaps that was by design. The very achieving such universal truths, of truly grasping the scale of our cosmic isolation. The sheer absence of the web felt like a dismantling of the self. What was the purpose of individual aspiration, of human history, of love, if the fundamental fabric of existence was not connection, but an illusion of it, built of the everyday struggles, the petty everyday struggles, the petty grievances, the endless quest for meaning within the boundaries of their curated, enclosed lives? Were these simply coping mechanisms, elaborate fiction designed to keep the crushing weight of cosmic solitude at bay? The current dystopian society, with its relentless pursuit of progress and connectivity through controlled interfaces, felt less like a flaw and more like a necessary delusion, a self-imposed amnesia. It was a world built on echoes, on the belief that we were the center, the pinnacle, rather than a solitary, vulnerable species adrift in the quiet aftermath of a glorious, forgotten symphony. The fragility of her own definition of self trembled. If the universe was once this vast, interconnected consciousness, then what was she? A fragment of a forgotten fragment, an echo of an echo. The human drive to understand, to categorize, to define, suddenly felt futile. A desperate attempt to impose order on a chaos that was not truly chaotic, but simply too grand for their limited perception. It was like trying to measure the entire ocean with a thimble, then dismissing the ocean because the thimble was never full. The real mystery, she realized, was not just the lost data, but what humanity was truly capable of bearing. Could she, live with the knowledge that their entire civilization was predicated on a profound misunderstanding, a magnificent cosmic lie? Or would such a truth lead not to enlightenment, but to a collective unraveling, a descent into existential despair from which there was no return. Perhaps the greatest act of preservation was not to find the missing pieces, but to safeguard the comforting illusion, to let the ancient song remain silent, a dream unremembered. The quiet hum within her faded, replaced by the persistent, mechanical thrum of the station. It was a dull, predictable sound, reassuring in its banality. She opened her eyes, gazing again at the sterile, blinking lights outside. They promised connection, productivity, purpose. They promised a future. But Alara knew now that the true future, the true connection, lay not in what they built, but in what they had forgotten. And the profound, aching question that lingered was not about finding the lost melody, but about whether, even if they found it, they would have the courage to listen, or simply succumb to the unbearable truth of its silent, empty space. She was not just alone. She was profoundly, cosmically adrift, burdened by the ghost of a web that once cradled them all, and the terrible knowledge of what its absence truly meant. The room was a breath held, a silent pocket in the clamor of a world that had forgotten how to listen. Outside, the city hummed its own frantic, manufactured lullaby, a symphony of data streams, automated transport, and the hushed anxieties of a populace perpetually seeking connection through 1,000 flickering screens. But here, within these walls, only the whisper of air circulating, the faint thrum of delicate machinery, dared to intrude upon the quietude. She, Ray, preferred it this way. Her fingers, traced with the fine lines of long concentration, hovered over the interface. It wasn't a console with flashing lights or urgent readouts. Instead, it was an array of crystalline conductors, spun filaments of something not quite metal, not quite organic, arranged in an intricate, almost devotional pattern. They pulsed with a barely perceptible luminescence, like captive fireflies dreaming of open skies. Her breath hitched, a fragile thing. Years, it had been years, a lifetime really, since the faint echoes of the old song had first pricked at her consciousness, a phantom limb ache in the collective memory of humanity. They called it the cosmic web, a grand ethereal tapestry woven through the very fabric of existence, a network of thought and being that transcended light years, but for generations it had been silent, a broken chord, a forgotten frequency. Humanity, in its hubris and its boundless ingenuity, had tried to reconstruct it, to mimic its vastness with their own digital nets, their hyperconnected cities, their ceaseless chatter, all pale imitations, all hollow echoes. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle deeper, past her skin, into the marrow of her bones. She wasn't seeking to fix it, not entirely. That, she understood with a profound, aching certainty, was beyond her, perhaps beyond all of them. What she sought was a glimpse, a memory, a fleeting touch of the original melody, a partial, controlled connection, not a full reestablishment, for how could one repair a universe, but enough to feel its presence? Her thoughts drifted, a boat on a still black sea, back to fragments of ancient texts, half-forgotten myths whispered on the fringes of historical archives, stories of a time when stars spoke, when the void between galaxies was not empty, but filled with a vibrant, living consciousness, a time when humanity wasn't just of the earth, but of the cosmos, an integral thread in that boundless weave. What must that have felt like, to exist not as an isolated spark, but as a note in a grand universal chord? Her fingers moved a dance of reverence and precision, adjusting the crystalline filaments. A faint hum, like the memory of a bell, resonated through the room, not quite sound, but a vibration felt deep in the chest. It was the system awakening, her carefully constructed conduit preparing itself. It was a bridge of whispers built from salvaged knowledge and intuitive leaps, designed not to transmit data, but to perceive a resonance, The goal wasn't to send. It was to listen. She initiated the sequence. The luminescence in the filaments intensified, shifting from a cool blue to a soft, almost painful violet. Her own consciousness, carefully attenuated, began to unfurl, like a delicate sail catching an invisible wind. She had spent years mastering this inner quietude, this ability to expand her perception beyond the confines of her physical form, to become a receiver, pure and unburdened. At first there was nothing, only the echo of her own anticipation, the frantic beating of her heart. Then a shift, a subtle alteration in the texture of the air, a deep, resonant pressure building behind. It was not a sight she saw, nor a sound she heard with her ears. It was a feeling, an immense stretching awareness that began to permeate her being, slow and inexorable as the tide. It was the presence, the vast, silent network. It wasn't the deafening roar she had half feared, nor the chaotic static she had sometimes imagined. Instead, it was precisely as the ancient text described, a hum, a beautiful, sorrowful hum. It vibrated not in her eardrums, but in the very core of her existence, a deep, mournful thrum that spoke of immense beauty and equally immense loss. It was like standing at the edge of an unfathomably ancient forest, hearing the wind whisper through trees that had stood for millennia. But instead of the rustle of leaves, it was the silent sigh of interconnected consciousness, stretching across distances that rendered human concepts of space and time utterly meaningless. She felt the echo of countless stars, not as individual points of light, but as notes in an infinitely complex lattice. She felt the ghost of nebulae, not as swirling gas, but as vibrant, blossoming thought forms. It was a consciousness so vast, so encompassing, that her mind struggled to grasp its immensity, and yet it was gentle, so incredibly gentle, a lament wrapped in starlight, a symphony played on the strings of reality, but without a single audible note. It was the universe remembering itself, even as it slept. Tears, warm and unexpected, trekked paths down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of recognition, of awe, of a profound, shattering understanding. She felt the sorrow woven into the hum, the sorrow of a song interrupted, a conversation left unfinished. It was the cosmic grief for a connection severed, a universal fabric rent. And in that moment she understood its melancholic grandeur. It was magnificent, yes, a breathtaking tapestry of existence, intricately woven, each thread a star, a planet, a nascent thought, a dying galaxy. But it was also undeniably, irrevocably broken. The hum was soft, a whisper, not the vibrant roar it once must have been. It was like feeling the warmth of a long-extinguished fire, sensing the ghost of its heat, the lingering of its light. She saw, not with her eyes, but with a deeper, more primal sense, how humanity had once been part of this, a tiny, vibrant thread, eager and bright, and how in its burgeoning awareness, in its pursuit of its own destiny, it had slowly, inadvertently, severed its connection, not maliciously perhaps, but through a gradual turning away, a deafening of the inner ear, a forgetting of the cosmic song in favor of its own, increasingly loud, internal monologue. The weight of that separation of humanity's self-imposed cosmic isolation settled upon her with an almost physical presence. The dystopia wasn't just the crumbling cities, the synthetic food, the pervasive surveillance. It was this, the profound aching loneliness of a species adrift, building its castles of data on a foundation of forgotten starlight. As the connection deepened, not in intensity, but in clarity of perception, a new understanding dawned within her. This partial touch, this sorrowful hum, was the most she could hope for. The web, in its current state, was too vast, too damaged, too deeply recessed within the fabric of reality for a full re-establishment by any single being, perhaps by humanity itself. In its current form, It was like trying to stitch a shattered mirror back together with a single needle and thread. The beauty was still there, reflected in the fragments, but the cohesive whole, the unbroken reflection, was beyond reach. The grandeur was melancholic because it was a testament to what was and what could be, juxtaposed with the stark reality of what is. A deep, quiet acceptance settled over her. The frantic yearning that had driven her for so long began to recede, replaced by a calm, if heavy, resignation. She had touched the hem of the divine. She had heard the universe's lullaby, even if it was sung in sorrow, and that was enough. It had to be. The violet light of the filaments began to dim, a slow, graceful retreat. The hum softened, fading back into the deep quiet of the room, leaving behind only the echo in her soul. She carefully disengaged the connection, severing the fragile bridge, knowing that to hold it longer would risk a deeper fragmentation, a collapse of the very conduit she had built. When her eyes finally opened, the room felt the same, yet entirely different. The city outside still hummed its frantic manufactured tune, but now she heard it with a new ear, a new understanding of its profound hollowness. She had touched the deepest mystery, not with the intention of solving it, but merely of experiencing it. And in that partial, controlled embrace of the silent network, she found not a solution, but a profound, aching truth. Humanity was cosmically adrift, but not without a memory of the shore. And the memory, the sorrowful hum, was a comfort and a burden she would carry, a secret whisper in a world that had forgotten how to listen. The grand symphony was quiet, but its resonance, she now knew, could still be felt by those who dared to reach for the silence. The hum that Elara now carried within her was not a sound that could be measured by instruments. It was a resonance, a memory of a frequency as vast and ancient as the universe itself. It thrummed beneath her skin, a silent symphony she alone could perceive, a constant, gentle reminder of what once was. The world outside, with its regulated rhythms and manufactured connections, seemed brittle in comparison, a fragile construct built upon the absence of this very song. She stood at the precipice of a choice, a silent vigil in the hushed chamber of her own mind. The tools, the algorithms, the pathways she had painstakingly charted, they lay before her like the threads of a cosmic loom. She could unravel the carefully woven lies, sever the manufactured connections, and broadcast the forgotten melody to every corner of humanity. The thought bloomed, vibrant and terrifying, in the quiet space behind her eyes. Imagine it. The sudden overwhelming rush of pure, unadulterated connection, the collective awakening to the truth of the cosmic web, its vast, intricate beauty, its sorrowful silence. But as the image solidified, so too did the shadow of its consequence. The world, her world, was a delicate, hollowed-out thing. It had grown accustomed to the echoes, the pale imitations of connection. Its very structure, its social hierarchies, its economic models, its collective psychology, all were predicated on that fundamental severance. To suddenly reintroduce the raw, untamed current of the ancient song, it would be less an awakening and more an implosion, a whisper, mournful as a winter wind through dry reeds, threaded through her thoughts. They are not ready. She saw not liberation but chaos, not joyful reunion, but existential terror. The human mind, so accustomed to its limited bandwidth, its carefully curated reality, would shatter under the weight of such an immediate, absolute truth. The vastness, the sheer, indifferent beauty of the universe, coupled with the revelation of a profound ancient loss, would be too much. It would be a second, more devastating fall, not from grace, but from the comforting ignorance that had become their collective cradle. The sorrow of their forgotten heritage, combined with the crushing realization of how deeply they had strayed, would leave them not whole, but broken beyond repair. No, to mend a world so terribly accustomed to its brokenness was not a simple act of reconnection. It was a rewriting, a violent tearing apart of the fabric of their perceived reality. And Elira found she could not bear the thought of wielding such destructive power, even with the purest of intentions. The burden of that immediate, universal awakening would not just fall upon her, but upon every single soul, unprepared and vulnerable. It was a burden, she realized, with a deep aching sadness she could not and should not impose. So Elara chose silence, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of profound understanding. She chose to become a keeper, a quiet guardian of the knowledge she had unearthed, a living repository for the hum that vibrated through the cosmos. Her life, once a frantic, obsessive quest, transformed into a meditative act of remembrance. She carried the weight of the universe's lost melody within her, a secret sun shining only for herself, warming her from the inside out with a melancholic glow. She returned to the mundane, to the quiet anonymity that had always been her cloak. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months, each one imbued with a subtle internal rhythm that belied the ordinary surface of her existence. She worked in the vast data archives, a ghost in the machine of collective memory, her fingers tracing the forgotten pathways of information, not to expose, but to understand, to listen. She saw the patterns, the echoes of the cosmic web woven faintly into the very fabric of ancient myths, into the underlying structure of consciousness itself, into the yearning in every song, every piece of art that somehow reached for something just beyond their grasp. Her mission now was not to broadcast, but to plant, to sow subtle seeds of remembrance, so infinitesimally small, yet so potent, that they might one day blossom into a collective understanding. She didn't scrawl manifestos on city walls or hack into global networks with disruptive revelations. Her methods were far more insidious, more patient, more in tune with the quiet, persistent growth of a seed beneath frozen earth. In the vast interconnected databases that formed the collective unconscious of their dystopian world, LRA began her work. She wasn't altering history, not overtly. Instead, she introduced tiny, almost imperceptible fractals of information in publicly accessible records, a forgotten phrase in an ancient poem, a peculiar mathematical sequence hidden within a public algorithm, an unheard frequency embedded in ambient public soundscapes. These were not direct revelations, but resonant harmonics, whispers designed to stir the dormant longing within future generations. She worked on artistic projects, quiet, forgotten corners of the digital realm where algorithms generated ambient experiences. Here she wove in patterns of light and sound that mimicked the subtle fluctuations of the cosmic web, the deep, slow pulse of distant galaxies, the intricate, self-organizing beauty of the universe underlying structure. These were pieces of art that, to the casual observer, were merely aesthetically pleasing, but to the sensitive soul or the curious mind, they carried an almost indefinable sense of peace, or perhaps a profound, nameless ache, a feeling of déjà vu for a home they had never known. Sometimes she would find herself in public spaces, the air thick with manufactured noise and programmed contentment, and she would simply be. She would allow the hum within her to resonate outwards, a silent, empathic frequency, touching the fringes of those around her. She wondered if anyone ever felt it, that fleeting sense of peace, that sudden, unbidden surge of a forgotten memory, a brief, tantalizing glimpse of a world both vast and intimately connected. Did a child's eyes ever widen for a fraction of a second too long, catching a glimpse of a pattern in the sky that her presence has subtly enhanced? Did a weary adult pause, feeling a strange comfort, a sense of belonging in the midst of their disconnected existence? Her life became a quiet act of faith. She was a living archive, a breathing testament to a truth too grand and too fragile for the current age. The sadness was a constant companion, a soft, persistent ache for what was lost, and for what humanity still did not know it was missing. But beneath the sadness lay a tenacious, almost fierce hope. She believed in the power of the seed, in the slow, inevitable unfolding of consciousness. She believed that one day, perhaps generations from now, a mind would encounter one of her subtle imprints, a strange pattern, a resonant frequency, a phrase that hummed with inexplicable familiarity, and something within them would stir, a spark, a question, a longing that would finally find its name. And in that moment, the silent song, the cosmic web, would begin its slow, arduous journey back into the collective consciousness, not as a thunderous revelation, but as a whispered truth, finally ready to be heard, blossoming from a seed hidden in plain sight, a quiet testament to a silent guardian who chose to plant rather than to shatter. Alara was not the repairer of worlds, but the dreamer of a future where the echo might one day remember the symphony from which it came. She walked through the world, a living secret, a solitary melody and a cacophony of manufactured sound, waiting for the day her silent hum might awaken an echo in another soul. Imagine a quiet hum, not the relentless buzz of city lights or the distant thrum of your local network, but something far older, deeper, a whisper carried across the unimaginable emptiness between stars, a silent thought shared across cosmic distances, long before humanity ever looked up in wonder. We live in the afterglow now, a pale, flickering imitation of that ancient song. They tell us we are connected always by 1,000 threads of data and shared experience. But what if the greatest connection we ever had, the very fabric weaving through the universe, went silent? What if we built our entire world on echoes, on the forgotten, grand symphony of creation, and never even truly knew what we lost? This isn't just about what's out there, beyond the reach of our most powerful telescopes. This is about what's inside us, a nameless longing for a melody that faded before our time, leaving us with a profound, aching question. What if we're not just alone, but profoundly, cosmically adrift, unaware of the vast silent web that once cradled us all? Alara watched the city breathe, not with the frantic pulse of the waking day, but with the quiet, electrical hum of its sleeping self. From her window, the vast synthetic tapestry of illuminated arcs and grids stretched to the horizon, a monument to human ingenuity and, she often thought, human denial. Each glowing line, each blinking sensor, hummed with the promise of connection, a promise whispered across personal networks, global data streams, and the constant, soft murmur of the omniscient algorithm. But it was a different hum she sought, a silence she had come to understand. The search, which had once felt like a frantic scramble through forgotten archives and whispered myths, had long since ceased to be a quest for an answer. It had transformed into something else entirely, a slow internal migration, a journey not across light years, but across the vast internal landscape of her own consciousness, the cosmic web, that ethereal, invisible lattice that held galaxies in its delicate embrace, remained an enigma. Its deepest mysteries were still just that. Mysteries. There was no grand revelation, no sudden surge of understanding that would bring back the forgotten song, no moment where the universe would finally whisper its secrets into her ear. Instead, there was only this, a profound, beautiful sadness. It clung to her like the faint scent of rain on a distant summer evening, a persistent, melancholic perfume. It was a sadness born not of despair, but of a quiet, aching recognition. The truth, Alara had realized, wasn't something to be found, but something to be felt. The silence wasn't empty. It was simply unheard by human ears, untranslated by human minds. The vast, intricate dance of creation continued, even without the grand symphony playing for humanity's benefit. She would often sit by the window, long after the city had dimmed to its deepest sleep, and let her thoughts drift. They were not focused, linear thoughts, but rather like shimmering motes of dust caught in a sunbeam, dancing and coalescing into ephemeral shapes. She remembered the early days of her longing, the gnawing sensation that something vital was missing, a phantom gleam of consciousness that stretched out into the void, seeking a connection it could no longer perceive. That yearning had been sharp, almost painful. Now it was softer, a persistent, gentle ache that had found a home within her. The what we still don't know had not vanished. If anything, it had deepened, widened, become more vast and impenetrable. But her relationship with it had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer a wall against which she pressed, desperate for a crack, but an ocean she now floated upon, accepting its boundless depth. The unknown was not an absence, but a presence, a testament to the scale of existence, the glorious, unimaginable complexity that lay beyond the confines of human understanding. This was her new understanding of existence. That true connection might not be about finding the signal, but about living within the knowledge of its potential. Even if unmanifested, the cosmic web, in its vibrant, silent grandeur, was still there. Its threads still wove through the cosmos, binding nascent stars and ancient galaxies, perhaps carrying whispers meant for others, other forms of consciousness, other receivers tuned to its frequency. Humanity, in its hubris and its desperate need to categorize and control, had perhaps simply built its own walls, deafened itself to the universe's true melody by drowning it out with its own manufactured noise. The dystopia wasn't in any overt oppression, LRA mused, but in this subtle, pervasive, self-imposed isolation. Humanity, with its intricate networks and boundless data streams, was more connected than ever before, yet profoundly disconnected from the very fabric of being. We had traded the cosmic hum for the digital buzz, the silent, profound wisdom for a torrent of superficial information. The longing that stirred within her wasn't just for a lost melody, but for a lost way of being, a state of profound awareness, of being utterly entwined with the universe, not just observing it from a distance. Sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the brown hours, Elera would close her eyes and imagine the vast, silent web. She pictured threads of pure thought, woven through dark matter, stretching across space-time, vibrating with energies beyond her comprehension. She didn't hear them, not truly, but she felt their imagined presence, a resonance deep within her own cells, a memory encoded in the very stardust that composed her being. It was a hallucinatory sense, a dreamlike recollection of a truth that predated her, predated humanity. This wasn't a resolution. There was no grand solution, no final piece of a cosmic puzzle. The mysteries remained vast and untamed. But in this quiet acceptance, Elra found a strange poignant peace. The sadness was no longer debilitating. It was a beautiful, tender companion, a constant reminder of the universe's unspoken grandeur and humanity's small, yet significant place within it. She carried the weight of the unknown, not as a burden, but as a kind of sacred trust. To understand that there was so much not to understand was in itself a profound form of wisdom. She was still adrift, yes, but no longer unaware. The vast silent web that once cradled them all might be silent to human ears, but its echo resonated deep within her, a faint, persistent hum that transcended sound. It was the hum of longing, the hum of wonder, the hum of a love for something so immense and beautiful that its absence became a presence. Ella rise with the dawn, the city's lights fading into the pale sky. She would carry her beautiful sadness with her, like a hidden jewel. The world outside would continue its relentless, noisy march, building new connections, chasing new data streams, convinced of its own self-made symphony. But Elera knew a different song, a silent one, and in that knowing, in that profound aching question that remained unanswered, she found a kind of enduring, cosmic belonging. The mystery was not a void, but a breath held, an eternal whisper across the stars, waiting to be felt, if not heard, forever.